I'm Andrew Reddie. I'm on the faculty at the Information School at the University of California, Berkeley, and I'm also the founder of the Berkeley Risk and Security Lab. And I work primarily on nuclear weapons policy and also some emerging technology and security stability issues. Oh, laterally is probably wargaming. I think I'm probably best known as part of a team that tried to pull together experimental design on the one side and then political and military wargaming on the other, so that we can actually try to use the method to answer, social science questions where synthetic data is actually necessary. For example, if a policymaker wants to know how the introduction of hypersonic weapons impacts security stability, we can't kind of look at the world in terms of we don't have cases, we don't have empirical data to use, and so we use wargaming as a tool to try to address that gap alongside formal models, survey experiments, etc. Oh, probably wargaming. Although I guess my first love is arms control. So I'm really interested in how governments have thought about trying to control technology in varieties of different ways, from domestic legislation on the one hand, all the way up through kind of creating multilateral organizations focused on kind of bounding the things that you can build as a state, and then the things that you can go about using on the battlefield. And so both are pretty interesting to me. Yeah, technology control. Probably undergrads. Just by virtue, I teach graduate students, so it's probably easiest. But I also did design an IR curriculum for a high school, so open. But yeah, undergraduates certainly is getting folks ready for the next step in their journey, whether it's work or graduate school or a PhD. Also the good. Oh, that's a good question. I'm an interloper, I suppose. I started my work on Civil War in the 2000s, interested in how to kind of rebuild war-torn societies via things like rule of law reform and economic reintegration. And over time, did work studying the United Nations, and then was given the global governance portfolio at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is my first job out of graduate school. And there, they needed somebody to take the internet governance portfolio before it was sexy. So before Snowden, they were looking for somebody that knew how to code. And my background was hacking iPods because they're just flash drives. I guess actually for your community, iPods are probably a technology before what they're used to. But back in the day, we used to have iPods, which are souped up flash drives, and so we would hack those. And so they were looking for somebody to take that portfolio, and I did. And then when I started my PhD, my intention was to go back to Civil War, but I ultimately, like I said, I got really interested in kind of the intersection of technology and international security issues, which led me down the nuclear road, led me down the cybersecurity road, etc. I think the one of the things that's maybe a little bit interesting about my background as an academic is that I spent a lot of time at the national laboratories. So as a pre-doc, I was at Lawrence Livermore, and then I spent a couple of years at Sandia National Labs, and currently have an affiliation with Lawrence Livermore again. And so I think that one of the things that I strive to do is make sure that the work that me and my team are doing are kind of policy relevant. And so that policy background is maybe a little bit distinct. But with that said, a lot of us on the academic side at this point are also, cycling through government. Oh, I mean, existential risk, right? I mean, a lot of the things that we work on, right, have dramatic downstream consequences. From what are the ramifications of new AI technologies, which I think is fairly well worn at this point. I'm less concerned about Terminator, but very concerned in terms of how states want to use this technology as part of their military affairs. Nuclear weapons, obviously, right, still a major concern. And I think that the way that the world's shifted, things like Ukraine, the current Ukraine crisis, kind of has focused minds on why this type of work is very relevant. It looks like we're moving towards a world in which we have great power competition, and we have to decide what that means. And hopefully it doesn't just mean going back to the world of the 1960s and 1970s. It means something a little bit different. And so I think it's up to the next generation to kind of figure out what that looks like. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, what just happened? I mean, the so we as academics had thought that wars for territory or territorial conquest were effectively over, right? We know we were going to see great power competition more or less at the margins, and you were far more likely to see kind of gray zone back and forth, whether those are cyber attacks and or freedom of navigation operations and what have you. But I think that what Ukraine demonstrates is that the fight over territory is still matters, and I think that's a trend that's fairly worrying. Of course, for those of us that were in the Civil War literature, we always knew that territorial conquest was a thing, just at kind of the sub-state level rather than the interstate level. But I think the fact that that's now front and center and you've got great powers engaged in that territorial conquest is pretty troubling. Which isn't to say that we should have a one-to-one comparison between what goes on in Ukraine and what goes on in East Asia in terms of like a Taiwan Straits crisis, for example. I think that's a little bit overdone, but I think in general you do worry about that trend line.